I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy.
You can find previous podcasts and more information on a range of health topics at peoplespharmacy.com. We're surrounded by toxic chemicals in our water, air, and products we use every day. Is it possible to detoxify? This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Plastic seems so convenient. It's lightweight, doesn't break easily, and it's inexpensive. But are we paying too steep a price with our health?
Our immune system balances between fighting off infection and overreacting to threats. Autoimmune disease has been on the rise for decades.
Are environmental chemicals responsible for fatigue, hormone disruption, and autoimmune diseases? Our guest today will offer detox strategies for a healthier life.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, protecting your immune system from everyday toxins.
In the People's Pharmacy Health Headlines. Nobody wants to think about COVID, but scientists have just discovered a potential new risk for certain individuals. Infection with respiratory viruses, such as SARS-CoV-2 or influenza, can reactivate dormant cancer cells. Research in mice found that disseminated breast cancer cells in the lungs suddenly sprang into action and increased by 100-fold or more when the mice were infected with one of these respiratory viruses. The infection appears to encourage immune cells to produce interleukin-6, which in turn awakens the cancer cells. Under these conditions, though, the immune system protects the cancer rather than attacking it. To state the obvious, mice are not people. However, analyses of cancer data from two large databases, one in the UK and one in the US, demonstrate that people infected with SARS-CoV-2 after their cancer diagnosis have a higher risk of metastasis to the lungs and cancer-related mortality than cancer patients who avoid infection.
Most Americans have put COVID behind them. Masks and vaccines are not top of mind these days, even though the rates of COVID-19 infection are growing in most parts of the country. Could there be a way to reduce the likelihood of viral spread indoors? Australian researchers wondered if germicidal ultraviolet light might reduce the incidence of respiratory infections in long-term care facilities for older adults. The investigators point out that improving ventilation can reduce airborne viral transmission. The price, however, often discourages organizations from investing in increased air exchanges. That's why they conducted a randomized clinical trial on germicidal UV light appliances in nursing homes. Overall, there was a 12% reduction in acute respiratory infections when the ultraviolet appliances were being used in common rooms. The investigators suggested that integrating such devices into ducted heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems would potentially improve air quality and infection control.
Ultra-processed food has a reputation for contributing to chronic disease. But is it the diet or something else about people who choose ultra-processed foods that's responsible? To find out, scientists in England assigned 55 overweight people to follow a minimally processed diet and an ultra-processed diet for 8 weeks each. The diets adhered to the UK Eat Well nutrition guidelines, with the ultra-processed items including breakfast cereals, protein bars, and chicken sandwiches low in fat and salt. For the minimally processed diet, participants got foods like overnight oats, chicken salad, and homemade spaghetti bolognese. The order in which the diets were provided was determined randomly. The main outcome for the study was % change in weight for each participant. 45 people completed the trial, losing weight on both diets. However, most people lost more weight on minimally processed food. On average, weight loss doubled on such diets. People also lost twice as much body fat. However, the ultra-processed diet lowered undesirable LDL cholesterol more. The researchers say that their study shows following nutrition guidelines really can be helpful, especially if you focus on minimally processed foods.
Patients and physicians have become leery of opioid-type pain medications, especially for non-cancer chronic pain. As a result, doctors are turning increasingly to gabapentinoids. One of these, gabapentin, was originally approved to treat epilepsy. It was later given the green light for postherpetic neuralgia, which is the severe pain following a shingles attack. The other gabapentinoid is pregabalin, originally sold under the brand name Lyrica. The FDA approved it to treat nerve pain, epilepsy, and fibromyalgia. A new study of Medicare beneficiaries suffering from chronic pain revealed a higher incidence of heart failure among people taking pregabalin compared to gabapentin. The investigators conclude that their findings suggest that pregabalin should be prescribed with caution in older patients. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. We live in a world full of toxic chemicals. For one thing, plastic is everywhere, and getting rid of it has become an overwhelming challenge, especially since microplastics accumulate in our bodies.
We've long worried about chemicals such as PFAS, the so-called forever chemicals, and let's not forget phthalates and bisphenols. These endocrine disruptors are ubiquitous in our everyday lives.
Our guest is Dr. Aly Cohen. She practices rheumatology and integrative medicine. She's a leading medical and legal expert in environmental health. Dr. Cohen is co-author of the best-selling consumer guidebook, Non-Toxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World. Her latest book is Detoxify: The Everyday Toxins Harming Your Immune System and How to Defend Against Them.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Aly Cohen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Cohen, we are so grateful to speak with you. We have really enjoyed your book, and especially your story about Truxton and how Truxton helped you start your journey to detoxify people that you care for. Could you tell us a little bit about that story, please?
Yes, happy to. Really, Truxton was my firstborn. It was our starter baby, or starter pup, as many people have. And he was a golden retriever, and I was really a new mom out of rheumatology training and, internal medicine and full training. And I had two young kids, about a 2-year-old and maybe a year old. And then there was Truxton. And Truxton, we had moved to the suburbs of New Jersey, farm country, garden state, and the dog became really sick. And I thought, he probably swallowed a sock or something, and we'd see it on the other end coming out, right? He's a golden. But it turned out he had what was diagnosed pretty quickly to be autoimmune hepatitis, which is a autoimmune disease. Humans get this as well. And ironically, I'm an autoimmune disease specialist, especially at that time when I was out of training. My dog became ill with something that more humans get than animals, particularly dogs, very rare in dogs. And I became so upset, so heartbroken, that it really led me on a journey. I started to think about his food quality, whether it was contaminated, whether or not the farm country we lived in at the time and still do was spraying pesticides that could have affected his immune system and triggered it against him. I looked at his water quality. I looked at his plastic red toy that he always had in his mouth. And essentially what I realized now, this was 15 years ago, was that I was doing an environmental health assessment on my dog because he had something so unusual at such a young age. Fast forward, I'm doing the same things now as an adult rheumatologist, also seeing kids, but really it hasn't changed in my overall viewpoint, except for the fact that we're now seeing much more of what I used to see back then.
Well, I'm very sorry that the dog got sick, and as I understand it, didn't survive. Tell us a little bit more, please, if you would. If a patient comes into you, how would you do a similar environmental assessment as you did for Truxton, to try to figure out what's going on with this patient?
So, wonderful question. And this has evolved over 15 years of having been trained in integrative medicine with Dr. Andrew Weil and colleagues. And then you add in the rheumatology training. And then now you add into this picture assessments using an environmental health history. And essentially, what I'm really looking for, not just what medications people are on or family history or some of the more common questions, of course, I'm adding into that a whole different layer of detective work, so to speak. What do people drink in terms of sodas or juices, but really also water quality? Do you filter your water? Air quality. Do you have candles at home? Febreze. Do you open your windows? Do you have gas stoves and appliances? These are not to judge. It's not to shame. It's to really gather more information as to what type of exposures people are having in their homes, which is where most people spend most of their time, and to see if that has anything to do with the symptoms that they have, such as fatigue, as I talk about with a patient in the book, as in addition to things like inflammatory conditions, rheumatoid, lupus. So anything that really plays into their current health status, I'd like to know where their bodies are moving throughout their lives and seeing whether or not even occupationally, hobbies, gardening, turf exposure, where are they playing a role in terms of possible health issues?
Oh, you mentioned a patient who had fatigue, and in the book, Detoxify, you write about Massimo. And what was going on with Massimo? Can you tell us his story, please?
Yeah, Massimo had come to me and he was really feeling tired, not feeling great overall. He was a little bit overweight, but he was generally, a relatively, young guy with young kids, and he wasn't feeling his best. And he knew there was something wrong with being that age and not feeling well, his energy level and so on. But what I really wanted to do is get a full holistic history. How much did he exercise? What was his lifestyle like? Where did he work? What chemicals were he exposed to potentially? What was his vitamin D level? What was his infectious history in terms of Epstein-Barr? Did he need an autoimmune disease panel to see if there was something else going on? And so this big picture of not just what I'm asking to glean information, but also what do the labs look like, routine labs using conventional laboratory testing for, LabCorp, Quest, what have you, nothing fancy. Would I be able to pull out the best information to give him the best direction? And in fact, that's what we did with Massimo, and really ruled out a lot of things, then fixed some of his nutritional issues, but really understood that his exposures might default into beyond conventional Western medicine, really into something along the lines of chemical exposures. And in fact, that's what happened. He was a pizza maker. He owned a pizzeria. He was touching lots of boxes and lots of materials that contain perfluoroalkyls and some of the grease-proof chemicals that we know are very pervasive. They don't break down in the environment, but they also don't break down very easily in humans. He also wasn't exercising or sweating. He wasn't finding time to help his body eliminate even the chemicals that he was exposed to. And he was eating pretty poorly in terms of sort of the standard American diet, not thinking about water quality. He was drinking a lot of sodas. And so when you combine all of these behaviors and you think about evolution and anthropology and what our bodies truly need, Massimo was unfortunately not getting a lot of what really humans need in modern day times in terms of thriving and making their bodies work optimally.
Dr. Cohen, after you intervened, did it make a difference in his life? And I'd like you to talk a little bit more about those pizza boxes. You're talking about PFAS chemicals, and there are a lot of them. And most people don't think twice about the wrappers that their food is contained in. So give us a sense of PFAS, but also what happened to Massimo.
Yeah, so the perfluoroalkyls are a group of compounds that are human-made. They were like thousands of other types of chemicals and types of chemical classes were made pretty much after World War II, when we really had this huge load of chemicals added into the, the consumer market in the United States, and our products such as personal care and cleaning products on surfaces like nonstick pans have perfluoroalkyls. We know that they coat, for instance, popcorn bags to make them grease-proof. They're part of a lot of fast food wrappers. They're very much pervasive, as many of our synthetic chemicals are, and we can get into that. But in his case, this was a gentleman whose whole life was really involved with touching wrappers, not only for what he ate and what he picked up at different places, but also in his own occupation, where the perfluoroalkyls are often found in, grease-proof paper, but also in recycled paper. Newspapers often go into making a lot of food packaging, particularly pizza boxes. It's cheap, it's easy. And, this is just one area. We also see this in toilet paper. We see it in places where people wouldn't really question the quality or the contents because it's outside of the body. We're not eating it. But in fact, we can absorb some of these chemicals certainly through our skin, but then definitely through ingestion in terms of packaging and food wrappers and those type of things. So this was an area that I knew pretty well, having studied this and written quite a bit about it. And so I did end up doing a perfluoroalkyls test on him, given his occupation, given his symptoms that we had narrowed down, again, from Western medicine and understanding the thyroid gland and nutrition and all those things, and really aimed to make these changes with him. And not only did he change, he was wearing, now nitrile gloves, which are not latex, but plastic gloves that often, healthcare providers will now use instead of latex in case there's a latex allergy. So he was now using gloves, as we talked about, but he was also biking to work and finding more time, to exercise on weekends and managing his sleep a little bit better in terms of how the body manages chemicals while we sleep. The lymphatic system, we remove a lot of chemicals that, we're exposed to during the day. He was drinking more water, certainly filtered water. We talked about a very inexpensive way to filter his drinking water, which helps to detox and manage the liver and kidney function. You need kind of good inputs in if you're going to be washing things out, so to speak. So we made all these changes to his diet, to his nutrition. I suggested he, consider nutrients that you can't always get from food, like fixing his vitamin D level, which can give people a lot of fatigue.
Dr. Cohen, we are coming up on a break. Can you give us the 15-second end story for Massimo?
Yes. Well, 15 seconds, Massimo did much better. There's no perfection, but he was really doing much, much better. And his levels went down. And it also correlated with how he was feeling, which is really critical. You never want to treat just the lab. You want to treat the person. So he did great.
You're listening to Dr. Aly Cohen, author of Detoxify, the everyday toxins harming your immune system and how to defend against them. She's a rheumatologist and integrative medicine physician and is on the faculty of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine.
It's time for a short break. Coming up next, we'll hear more about immune disrupting chemicals.
How do chemicals affect our immune system? More importantly, what does that do to our bodies?
You'll learn how to detoxify your life, starting with water.
What can we do at home to improve our water supply?
Should you be buying bottled water, or is filtering your water better?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This podcast is brought to you in part by Caraway Cookware. Caraway Cookware got started when its founder accidentally overheated a non-stick Teflon pan. The fumes made him sick, and so he decided to make beautiful, non-toxic cookware.
We love using our Caraway frying pan. It looks great, cooks beautifully, and cleans up so easily. And it's great to know we're not being exposed to dangerous chemicals.
Caraway also makes glass containers for food storage. Remember, never, ever put a plastic container in the microwave.
Caraway is having a sweepstake where every dollar you spend is an entry to win $100,000 in a kitchen remodel. And every purchase helps keep your family safe from toxic chemicals.
If you've been eyeing their internet-famous 12-piece cookware set, now is the perfect time to buy. You can shop Caraway risk-free. Enjoy fast, free shipping, easy returns, and a 30-day trial. Plus, if you visit carawayhome.com/PPOD, you can take an additional 10% off your next purchase. The deal is exclusive for our listeners, so visit carawayhome.com/PPOD or use the code PPOD at checkout. Caraway, non-toxic cookware made modern. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
Everyone knows that our immune system is critical to defending us against infections and internal threats like cancer. But if it overreacts, the result can be autoimmune diseases. Why is water quality so critical to maintaining a healthy immune system?
We're talking with Dr. Aly Cohen, who practices rheumatology and integrative medicine. She's a member of the faculties of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, Southern California University of Health Sciences, and the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Cohen is co-author of the best-selling consumer guidebook, Non-Toxic: Guide to Healthy Living in a Chemical World. Her latest book is Detoxify: The Everyday Toxins Harming Your Immune System and How to Defend Against Them.
Dr. Cohen, one of the things you write about in Detoxify is a class of compounds you call immune disrupting chemicals. Now, we have heard of endocrine disrupting chemicals, and we want to avoid them as much as possible. You write about those as well. But tell us about immune disrupting chemicals. What are they? Where do we find them? How can we avoid them?
So immune disrupting chemicals is an acronym that, having studied EDCs or endocrine disrupting chemicals for decades, and or I should say for the last 10 years, but certainly the material has been out there for at least 2 decades. I really thought, why are we not looking at many of the same chemicals, believe it or not, that have hormone effects? Why aren't we looking at them in terms of their immune system effects? And so I coined them immune disrupting chemicals. I never found any of this in the literature. I even brought it up with my co-author, Dr. Frederick Baum-Saul, who's a remarkable researcher and co-author. And I said, we should be really talking about this from a different perspective. As a rheumatologist, this makes sense to me. And fortunately, he said, you should do this. This is a really important topic and a really important framing. And essentially what it is basically taking all the literature that we now know about many of these compounds that are synthetic, that are unregulated, untested, and looking at how they are affecting not just hormone disruption, signaling, but how they can also cause inflammation, how they can affect a whole host of immune clinical illnesses, such as autoimmune diseases, what those mechanisms are, how they can affect the gut microbiome in terms of the gut microbiome's ability to affect our health through the immune system of the gut. And also in terms of blood levels of specific compounds and how they can play into clinical diseases, or even not even responding to vaccines appropriately because of their ability to disrupt the immune system. So that was found with the perfluoroalkyls, actually. So we now know so much about BPA and certain classes that we can now show the connections to the immune system. And by the way, the immune system and the endocrine system are intricately connected. There's crosstalk. In fact, every immune system cell in the body has estrogen receptors and other hormone receptors. So we know that they communicate. And that was how I wanted to frame this discussion. And immune disrupting chemicals was the focus.
Dr. Cohen, during COVID, a lot of people said, well, you just build up your immune system and you can resist it. And we hear this a lot from people who say, well, I'm not going to get a flu shot. I just need a strong immune system. I'll just take vitamin C.
But people don't really know how to make their immune system strong, do they?
Well, they don't, and they don't think that their shampoo or their makeup or other kinds of chemicals that they're putting on or in your body that they could possibly affect their immune system. And then I watch TV and I see all those drug commercials, and some of the most powerful ones for rheumatoid arthritis and for psoriatic arthritis and for eczema, they all say, well, yeah, these medicines could affect your immune system. Be careful you don't catch TB. Well, most people don't worry about tuberculosis, but the fact that these medications can have such an impact on the immune system, I think is somewhat surprising to people. And then they just say, well, the heck with it. There's so many chemicals, I don't need to worry about anything. So help us understand how chemicals do affect our immune system and what that does to our bodies and to our well-being.
Yeah, so I'll go back and try to give some perspective, because you're absolutely describing a very complex discussion, right? The immune system is incredibly complex. We've been utilizing the immune system for millions of years. And essentially, it works quite miraculously. The human body does not like foreign bodies, so to speak. So it does have the ability to be angry when we are putting things into our body that it doesn't recognize, whether it's a transplanted kidney and we have to suppress the immune system from fighting this foreign body. Whether it's another foreign type of medical miracle or device, whether it's, medications that we don't respond to in a way that we would hope, because the body sees that as a problem. But we can also extend that conversation about the immune system's miraculous capabilities to environmental chemicals. The problem is that most people don't see immediate reactions to these chemicals in their bloodstream, in their urine, in their breast milk. Because they're very, very low levels, right? They're parts per million, parts per billion, parts per trillion in terms of the exposure doses. Now, that being said, we're exposed to so many chemicals that there's also a mixture effects of how these chemicals may have subtle effects, but be additive, maybe synergize. When we're talking about medications to reduce the immune system's activity, that's for people who generally have an overactive immune system, inflammatory conditions that are very obvious, like rheumatoid arthritis and MS and lupus and Crohn's disease. And that's where there may be a need to lower from outside the body using medications. What I'm trying to share with people through this book and through all the work I do with my own social media platform, The Smart Human, and other components of sharing education-wise, is to let people understand that our foreign chemicals, the chemicals that have never been designed or been part of the human existence for millions of years, have an ability to increase inflammation, whether it's very subtle and you don't see it clinically, or even more overt. And you want to try to remove those as best you can. And that's why I give really reasonable information to empower people. And then the second part is to add in the components, the nutrition, the things that we're missing in a modern day food system in our lives to bolster the immune system in a healthful way. So it's a two-part system. You want to remove stuff the body never really needed to use, hasn't been experiencing for millions of years, which is causing inflammation. And then you want to add in the stuff, the human fertilizer, as I call it, to really help the body thrive and do what it's meant to do, really, in terms of optimizing its physiology.
Dr. Cohen, one of the messages I appreciated most in Detoxify is that you state over and over again, you really want to start with the things that you're exposed to most. So where you spend most of your time, where you have the greatest exposure. And you suggest that for most people, we should start with water. Tell us why.
So water by volume is something all humans consume in such a large way, right? We can't even survive as humans without water for a 3-day, 4-day period, whereas food we could probably live without for a decent amount of time, a week or two. The idea is that our bodies are also made up of water. We're about 85% concentration of water in the human body in different organs and throughout our blood. And so to get this right really made sense to me. Now, we talk a lot about food. It's $1 billion industry, diet books, and everything from how much protein one should eat to how much fats and which kinds and seed oils. I have not seen any emphasis on the quality of drinking water in almost anything I observe. And so this was something I thought, how ridiculous that we're not really thinking about the biggest input into the human body since childhood, right? Birth till death, we need water. So when I talk about that, I had to learn about the water system in the United States. I had to understand how clean our water is. And I did a deep dive, and I talk about this in the chapter on water, about our municipal tap and how really unclean it is comparatively now to third world countries, of course, cleaner, but certainly following way outdated, archaic laws from 1974 and 6. We've had the Safe Drinking Water Act, which only covers 91 chemicals since the 1970s, and that's part of every wastewater treatment plant, 160,000 in the U.S., that service about 85% of the U.S. population. So most of our water is tap water, as we would call it, and about 15% of U.S. population gets serviced by wells, which have their own potential risk. The idea was that we need to clean our water because the regulations are not strong enough, given how many chemicals that can potentially get into our water system and do. And also the added chemicals like chlorine and chlorinated byproducts, detergents, detergent byproducts, even fluoride that are added at these wastewater treatment plants. And then the water travels, somewhere up to 30, 40 miles through PVC piping or lead piping to our home. So the punchline is that if you can clean your water when it hits your home, no matter whether it's from wells or it's from municipal tap water, that's the best opportunity to clean your water is at the point of use. And of course, I go into all the types of filtration, how easy it is. So that's what I'd recommend.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you next, Dr. Cohen, is give us some insight on what we can do in our homes, whether it's a well that we're drawing our water from or whether it's a municipal water supply. What would we find in your house?
Well, I'll tell you what we did find, because I do all this testing and I test a lot of different filters that get sent to me. But I will say to you, instead of spending $300, which is in the book, a lot of resources for people on, I'd say, a tap score test, which is a wonderful company. I would rather you take that same $300 and put it towards a type of filter that I feel is the most aggressive way mechanistically to clean our water, which is a reverse osmosis water filter, and use that in your kitchen sink, either on the counter if you buy that type, or underneath with a use of a plumber to put in for $150. Takes an hour. That same $300 is really, I've watched the market come down over the last 15 years. And reverse osmosis, although any filtration, I shall say, is better than nothing, in case you have a carbon block pitcher or a refrigerator door pitcher. Those are carbon blocks. They're reasonable, but they're not quite as aggressive as I would recommend. And quite frankly, they run more expensive than even an RO filter in many ways, because you have to pay for those refills. But reverse osmosis is simply a sieve. It's simply a material that's so tightly woven, about 1 micron, that it actually not only takes off infectious products like bacteria and mold and yeast and viruses, as it was designed for dialysis patients in the 70s, this material, but it also takes the bigger compounds, the bisphenols, the perfluoroalkyls, and many of the larger synthetic compounds that have been designed since the 70s, and removes those as well. So really, it's become the ideal message for me is, if you're going to get a filter system, try to look for reverse osmosis. But if not, any filtration is certainly better than none. And even when you're buying bottled water, you could actually look on the plastic bottle, no matter where you are, and it'll tell you how that water has been cleaned.
Well, let's stop right there for a second, because bottled water has become so controversial because of microplastics. And that's what you find. Most bottled water is not glass, it's plastic. So are people really getting better quality water when they're buying it at the grocery store, or would they be better off using a reverse osmosis filter on their home tap water?
So I think the choices are variable because our lives are fluid. And we have different experiences. So I'll say this, I take my reverse osmosis water that I have at home and I take it to dinner, or I'll take it to my kids' sports practices. We even have a 3-gallon stainless steel bottle that we can transport water and have that available so we can reduce microplastic exposure. We can reduce plastics in our environment, and it also saves money. So I do think if you can plan ahead and you can make your home water, which is what I recommend, the home system, whatever you choose, plus glass and stainless steel to transport your water, I think that's ideal. When you're traveling, when you're in places that I ran out of water at the lacrosse tournament, and so I was buying bottled water. I chose plastic bottles of water that were cleaned by reverse osmosis. As I was mentioning, you can look at the ingredients on any plastic water bottles to see where that water was cleaned. It's not going to affect the microplastic load. Of course, you don't know where that bottle's been or if it's heated, but you can certainly make a choice when it comes to the water quality. So again, I think knowing these little hints, these little hacks, knowing that most bottled water is actually tap water, believe it or not, and it's really far from regulated in terms of EPA. It has nothing to do with EPA. It's FDA overseen, but the idea is that doesn't give us any more comfort, that water from plastic is not great either. But when you plan, that's a really wonderful place to be. And I encourage people to make those small changes over time. This is a journey for everybody.
Dr. Cohen, we have just a couple more minutes in this segment, and I'd like to ask you about food. Which foods do we need to pay most attention to, and how do we do that?
So I would say most people have heard that processed and ultra-processed foods are probably a good idea to stay away from. We know that they contribute a great deal to modern day illnesses such as obesity, diabetes, and other metabolic conditions. And so really removing those from your diet as best you can is really one level of reducing a lot of these compounds, these chemicals, not only in the food packaging, but also the 12,000 or so chemicals that are unregulated and recognized by the food industry as generally recognized as safe, but not truly tested or looked at for toxicity. So because our food safety issues are such a big issue, that the chemicals are not tested before they go into our food products, staying away from those products is a good idea. Processed and ultra processed foods and packaged foods. Now, when you get to produce, right, we think of whole foods, Mediterranean diet, plant-based foods. Those are wonderful. And certainly the Mediterranean diet is the most well-studied of all diets, so to speak, in terms of inflammation reduction. But as I lay out in the book, when those foods are not necessarily evaluated for pesticide exposures and you're not choosing, maybe USDA organic, frozens are also very cheap and nutrient rich, or you're not washing off conventional produce with, just white vinegar and water or baking soda and water to get off some of those pesticides, in a way, you're bringing even those healthy foods to a level where they may not be as healthy as you think. And so the idea is not only to reduce the junk food, so to speak, but also to take the foods you are eating that are cleaner in terms of being whole foods and making sure you're thinking about removing pesticides or choosing USDA organic whenever it's possible.
You're listening to Dr. Aly Cohen, author of Detoxify, the everyday toxins harming your immune system and how to defend against them. She's a rheumatologist and integrative medicine physician, and she is on the faculty of the Southern California University of Health Sciences and the University of California, Irvine.
And Terry, I find her discussion of water quality so really important. We may not always pay as much attention to our water as we should. Well, it's time for a short break. Stay tuned for a story about microwaves, plastic forks, and airplane food undermining a pilot's health.
Dr. Cohen is out in front of most of her colleagues on the topic of detoxifying. What do they think of it?
You'll find out about her 21-day plan for reducing the levels of toxins in your life.
What 3 things can have the most impact on your health? What tests does she recommend?
How can health professionals identify the toxins that may be affecting our health?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This episode of The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu.
If you or someone you love struggles with nasal congestion, whether from allergies, chronic sinus issues, or even pregnancy-induced rhinitis, there's finally a drug-free, FDA-approved solution that actually works.
Sonu is a wearable headband that uses personalized sound-based therapy to open nasal passages and to improve airflow in minutes. It's backed by clinical research, developed by a Stanford rhinologist and physician, and safe for anyone ages 12 and up. No steroids, no sprays, just natural, fast relief.
You can learn more at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-approved, drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and runny nose, using sound instead of steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's getsonu.com.
Just about every health expert we've interviewed over the last 3 decades has warned listeners not to put plastic containers in the microwave. Why not? What about plastic forks and spoons?
We're talking with Dr. Aly Cohen, a board-certified rheumatologist and integrative medicine physician. She's a member of the faculties of the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, Southern California University of Health Sciences, and the University of California, Irvine. Her books include Non-Toxic, Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, and her latest, Detoxify, the everyday toxins harming your immune system and how to defend against them.
Dr. Cohen, everybody's in a hurry these days, and so microwaves are something that we can hardly live without. And you actually talk in your book a little bit about Ashley with rheumatoid arthritis. And you also talk about the airplane pilot who was eating airplane food. What else could he eat? Gaining weight, he was irritable, and everything he ate was basically plastic, heated in the microwave on the airplane. Tell us why plastic containers, microwave preparation can pose a problem.
So plastics are really kind of a material that leaches its components. The material itself can leach those chemicals into the foods and drinks that they carry. And even canned foods actually are lined with an epoxy plastic resin that has typically been designated as bisphenol A, but could also be substitutions, BPS, BPSIP. So needless to say, we get a lot of our food and drinks, even healthy foods like organic, USDA organic foods, in containers that actually contribute to some of those chemical exposures. And so it's one of those things where, we don't think about our plastic containers. We don't think about containers in general. We're too focused many times on our food quality and losing weight or what have you. But it turns out a lot of those chemicals that we're exposed to, such as BPA and phthalates and bisphenols and perfluoroalkyls, actually contribute to weight gain or inability to lose weight. So, when we're thinking about our foods and quality, we should really put in that piece about packaging and what to do differently, which is thinking about the materials that don't leach into the foods and drinks, like glass or stainless steel when you're heating up or when you're storing food. When you're carrying water, it's a good idea to have just, a designated stainless steel container. Mine is actually insulated, so I can have tea or coffee and change that around. But essentially, putting that layer of food packaging into our thought, I even put it into the food pyramid, the Detoxify food pyramid that's in the book, really to emphasize that it's not just the quality of our food, but it's really the importance of thinking about packaging. We cannot all control our food packaging, right? And we don't all grow our own food. But when we're thoughtful and we can think about food packaging, it really can play a big role into what our exposures are. And we've seen that with studies that I talk about in the book in terms of diet sodas and, drinking and eating from canned foods. Lots of great information about swapping even to frozen organics or fresh.
Dr. Cohen, I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that airplane pilot, Taylor, that Joe mentioned. What sorts of health problems was he having, and were you able to help him?
Yeah, he was experiencing a lot of inflammation, and if I get this correct, he might have had psoriatic arthritis or obesity. I can't remember entirely, although I did just see that patient, and I just reminded him that he's in my book under a synonym. But essentially, he's a wonderful patient, and he came in because he had inflammatory conditions, but at least the one I have here in my office, but also obesity, and really difficulty losing weight. And it wasn't just his sedentary lifestyle being a real, commercial pilot, but he was really living a difficult life of, everywhere he flew, he had to stay over. He, was eating quickly on the go in the airports. He was eating in the hotel lobbies, room service, and he was just always getting exposures to these plastic chemicals. And what we came up with was a lot of different ideas in terms of how to manage that. One of which was to have his own utensils and avoiding plastic forks, knives, and spoons wherever possible. Stainless steel is available. You can take your own utensils. He can also have container that's stainless steel that he can take with him. I wanted him to avoid hot soups where the heat, as with all plastics, are much more associated with breakdown of those plastic materials because heat can certainly leach those out. We've seen that with Tupperware that starts off clear and then goes through the dishwasher a bunch of times and turns out to be opaque. So that's the material being leached and kind of breaking down. So we came up with a bunch of ways to reduce inflammation, not just changing his diet quality and how much he eats, ordering room service at night, and getting really healthy foods so that his breakfast choices were very much healthy and full of, protein and vegetables as opposed to starchy carbs. We really worked on that, and he really began to lose weight because these chemicals again are called obesogens or obesogenic chemicals, and they really tend to mess with the human body at the cellular level and can affect weight loss as well as weight gain.
So, and Dr. Cohen, we've been talking about detoxify, how to detoxify from all of the hundreds, thousands of chemicals that we're exposed to on a regular basis. And I'm wondering how your colleagues relate to this message, because I think most medical students don't get a lot in their education about detoxification. I mean, they hear about mercury poisoning and lead poisoning and things of that nature, but not some of the chemicals that you're talking about in cosmetics and food and so ubiquitous in our environment. And so I think a lot of times they hear the word detoxify and they think fraud. They think, oh, those people are playing upon some of my patients' vulnerabilities. There's just too much nonsense out there. You really can't trust the detoxification programs because somebody's trying to make money. So help us better understand this whole idea of detoxification and how people can do it wisely, correctly, and not spend thousands of dollars on products or services that might not live up to expectations.
Wonderful question. And this is something I do have to contend with because you have the Western institutions that don't pay enough attention to this issue, to this process, to modern day exposures. And then you have the health and wellness world that I think there are many legit practitioners, but there's also a whole world of people that are doing too much testing for chemicals, which I don't even support as much. I want people to do the what instead of really testing, because that always changes day to day. And so that whole health and wellness world can certainly take desperate people and take advantage of them. The point of my book and the reason why it was just so important to get a straightforward evidence-based messaging out there was because I was concerned about both factions and doing it well. And I wanted people to understand that we can all do this ourselves at very low or no cost, believe it or not, and support this concept of detoxification is what our bodies have been able to do for millions of years until, boom, we hit the 1940s, 50s, where we have all these thousands, and it's estimated about 95,000 chemicals now that are able to get into our blood, into our urine, into our breast milk, and other parts of our body. So, it's modern day life meeting this phenomenal physiology, and how do we support that physiology through this process? So again, so much is based on testing in the health and wellness world, which I think is necessary when you see really important clinical changes, like you said, mercury or lead toxicity or occupational exposures or spills. But for the vast majority of people, I think routine testing through insurance, which a lot of people have, and I have the codes in the book for just routine insurance-based testing for healthcare providers, but also simply following a 21-day plan that I put together, which is, how do you remove a lot of these everyday chemicals that we're exposed to? Why does it matter? Why does it really matter? And then how do we put back in and support all of the pathways that we've had as part of human physiology? And I think that costs not only less money than most people think, because you're buying less and you're doing more, but you're also understanding how the body works and working to make it better, as opposed to, again, testing and crazy supplements and weird cleanses that are short-lived, or even short-lived diets. The idea is to build these changes as a lifestyle into your day-to-day, and so that they stick and it doesn't feel like a diet. It's part of just your day-to-day choices for health.
Well, Dr. Cohen, why does it matter?
It matters because we are now seeing sicker people at younger ages with very limited family history for these conditions. Similar to Truxton, my dog, we are seeing younger people experiencing immune and autoimmune diseases, amongst other types of conditions, way earlier, and again, without family history. So there's a very strong environmental component to why we're experiencing these conditions. And we know they work at the cellular level, many of these chemicals. And so we have a chance to intervene. We also know that exposures can play a role generationally, that there is what we call epigenetic changes that can occur from some specific chemicals that have been well studied. And so that being said, we want to try to figure out how to do this for ourselves so that we don't pass on any epigenetic changes to later generations. And that science has been well studied. So, I'm hoping not only for us to feel better, to prevent conditions that we know can occur from exposures over time, even to low levels and mixtures, but we want to also prevent the next generations from having some of the health conditions we're experiencing in this generation.
Dr. Cohen, I wonder if you would share with us the top 3 things that people can do to detoxify, and if they do need tests to figure out what's most important, which tests do you recommend?
So top 3 things, again, by exposure amounts and how easy it is. Number 1, I would say, for sure, don't buy junk. Don't buy a lot of cosmetics and personal care products that you don't need unless you look them up on free apps like ewg.org, their Skin Deep database, or Yuka, Think Dirty, Clearia, all wonderful apps to look up some of those products.
And let me just break in here to say EWG stands for Environmental Working Group. Fabulous organization.
For sure. They have been doing great work for decades. So we have these resources to look our products up before we buy them. We can also make our own. I even have do-it-yourself recipes for deodorant, for surface cleaners, for things that you do not have to spend money for, other than, say, white vinegar, Castile soap, lemon juice, sea salt for scrubbing. There's so much we can do if we make our own with very simple, inexpensive ingredients. We could also think about our drinking water as number 2 in terms of filtration. And number 3, again, thinking about food quality and moving even to USDA organic certified, which has teeth in this country. But frozens are great and nutrient rich as well. But even washing produce, with these simple ingredients, is very easy to help remove pesticide residues.
Oh, I want to pause that right there. What can you do to wash fruits and vegetables that's not like super expensive and doesn't add nasty things to them?
So really simple ingredients. So white vinegar 3%, 4%, 5%, you can get that anywhere. And if you do 1 part white vinegar to say 3 or 4 parts clean filtered maybe water or just clean water, agitate that produce for about, maybe a couple minutes, and you will see a very big difference in terms of even the water quality for a lot of produce. You can always use baking soda as well, 1 part baking soda to 2 or 3 parts of warm water. So that's a really easy way to go. Some of the vegetable sprays and produce sprays may actually have chemicals that we want to try to avoid. So I can't always say that any brand is so great. You may want to try that on Environmental Working Group or Clearia or Think Dirty as well to see if those products themselves to clean vegetables are well rated.
Dr. Cohen, I'm wondering what health professionals can do to help people identify what toxins might be present in their bodies so they can get started on detoxification.
Yeah, like what tests do you run on an average patient who's uncomfortable or not doing well?
So on most of my patients coming through, I utilize their own insurance and I often order nutritional labs. And I also order from an environmental health standpoint, a very simple whole blood arsenic, lead, mercury, and cadmium levels. So it's whole blood on those. And I put the ICD-10 codes, which are the codes that insurance requires to validate testing for those substances. And those tests are different, and you can see them in the book. But the idea is that I want to help practitioners, and I teach 3 physician training programs on environmental health. I want everyone to have access to the tests that don't cost them money beyond their insurance. There's certainly great labs outside of that, and I list them as well. But the idea is if you have that validated code, that's a really great way to start because mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and lead are very common in our water systems, particularly arsenic. Cadmium is also found in dark chocolate and some other exposures. Mercury is certainly seen now more than ever in fish, in sushi eaters. And so, and lead, of course, in water as well. So when you look at those 4 main ones, as opposed to thousands of chemicals, you can start to intervene with lifestyle changes, filtration. I have a patient in the book that was a big rice eater and had very high levels of arsenic in her testing. And we worked on rice, which is a big component, has potentially a large amount of arsenic that we want to either wash out or reduce in terms of exposure. So, there's lots of things we can do if we know what to look for. And when I teach doctors, I give them the 50-question survey that everyone has in this book, which is very simple questions. You score a 1 or a 0, and you look at where you start this process. Where are you getting exposed from very reasonable, common sense questions?
Dr. Aly Cohen, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Dr. Aly Cohen, author of Detoxify: The Everyday Toxins Harming Your Immune System and How to Defend Against Them. She's a rheumatologist and integrative medicine physician and is on the faculties of the Southern California University of Health Sciences, the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine, and the University of California, Irvine.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wadarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews. B.J. Liederman composed our theme music.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Sonu, an FDA-approved drug-free treatment for nasal congestion and sinus pressure, using sound instead of steroids. More at getsonu.com. That's GETSONU.com.
This show is a co-production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, with the People's Pharmacy.
Today's show is number 1440. You can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com. That's where you can share your comments about today's interview. You can also reach us through email, radio@peoplespharmacy.com.
Our interviews are available through your favorite podcast provider. You'll find the podcast on our website on Monday morning.
And that website is peoplespharmacy.com. When you go there, you could sign up for our free online newsletter and get the latest news about important health stories. When you subscribe, you also get regular access to information about our weekly podcast. That way, you can find out ahead of time what topics we'll be covering. Speaking of the podcast, we'd be grateful if you would consider writing a review of the People's Pharmacy and posting it to the podcast platform you use.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.